Greetings students, welcome to another episode of CSEC Social Studies with me, Albert Inshanali. Today we will continue the discussion on the changing roles of families in Caribbean societies. So far, we've looked at the traditional roles of men and women in Caribbean families. We've looked at how these roles have changed over time, and today particularly we'll focus on the effects of the changing roles of men and women in Caribbean society. At the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define key terms such as role conflict, identity crisis, and double burden. Today, you're also going to identify positive effects of changing roles on Caribbean society, as well as identify negative effects of changing roles on Caribbean society. First things first, let us define a few key terms before we look at the effects of changing roles in Caribbean society. Let us look at role conflict. Role conflict occurs when there are incompatible demands placed upon a person relating to their job or position. People experience role conflict when they find themselves pulled in various directions as they try to respond to the many situations that they're confronted with, the many statuses that they hold. In other words, there's an inconsistency with all the roles that they must perform. Now let us define identity crisis. An identity crisis is a crisis in one's sense of self. If you're suffering from an identity crisis, you may ask yourself, who am I? What are my roles? What must I do? And we find that because of the changing roles of men and women in Caribbean society, more people are suffering from identity crises. Now let us look at double burden. Double burden. The term used to describe the workload of many adults, mostly women, who do full-time work but still assume responsibility for unpaid domestic duties. Don't worry, during the lesson we'll delve into these three concepts in depth: role conflict, identity crisis, and double burden. Now, can you think of some positive effects of changing roles in Caribbean society? As we've spoken about in the past, we've noticed that the roles are changing. More women are now going to work. More women are earning their own income. So what are some positive effects of all of this happening? Can you think of any? All right. Well, the positive effects of changing roles include a greater level of equality between men and women. There is an increasing number of women who are now the sole breadwinners of their families, or they share responsibility within the home. Homes are therefore more likely to be egalitarian, whereby authority is shared between the mother and the father, instead of patriarchal, where the male is the sole authority figure. Now, what could result because of this? More women have greater confidence, more self-esteem, and more independence because they're contributing financially to the home and they feel great about it. And it's definitely something that should be celebrated. Another positive effect of changing roles within Caribbean society is that children are becoming much more independent and self-reliant from a very early age. Think about it. If both parents are out working, the child will have to take up additional responsibilities within the home. So therefore, the child is going to learn some positive skills, which are very important for later on in life. For example, the child may be making his or her own breakfast, the child may be washing the dishes, assisting with the ironing of the clothing, and so forth. You might say that this is unfair to the child, but guess what? In the real world, if the child is able to do some of these tasks from an early age, it will be much more easier when he or she goes off to college or lives on his or her own. So definitely children become much more independent and self-reliant because of the effects of changing roles in Caribbean society. Now also on the whole, families are less inward looking than the past. Yes, this means that they can be enriched by other members of society. Traditionally speaking, the father made all the decisions in the home without the input of anyone else. The family was so close-knit that it did not seek guidance, advice, recommendations from anyone else. But now families are more open-minded. They do realize that people are different, people are very diverse, they have their own cultural beliefs and practices, and because of these changing roles where more of the adults are going out in the world of work and they're interacting with a diverse group of people, they're able to be impacted within their own families and understand that change actually is possible. Now that we've looked at some positive effects of the changing roles of men and women in Caribbean society, can you think of some negative effects of the changing roles of men and women in Caribbean society? Well, let's think about it. Now, some negative effects are manifested in the youth of the communities. Yes, wayward and delinquent behavior and loss of cultural practices and values have been the result of change. Could you think of some factors that may have contributed to this? Think about it. Children are less supervised these days, especially if both parents are going to work. We could even call these kids latchkey children. That's a term that's used in the Caribbean, latchkey children, because they let themselves into the house in the evening and they're left unsupervised for long periods of time. Now tell me, what do you think may happen if a child, a teenager, is left unsupervised for many hours? That child may be susceptible to negative influences. That child may not get the attention and affection that he or she wants and may seek it outside of the house. It could come from other adults or even peers. And sometimes these peers or adults do not have the best interests of the children at heart. And when that happens, these children suffer greatly. So we can see whereby less supervision can lead to delinquent behavior. Now also, a loss of culture can happen. Traditions are not passed on. Children are not socialized as they used to be in the past. Think of it today. We have an abundant array of recreational activities. Family members are always engaged in something of the sort. They go to an event here, they go somewhere there, and sometimes, again, children do not get all the attention that they deserve, especially at a very tender age. You may even find that you have members within a household, within a family, are on their devices and they're not even speaking to each other in the home because they're busy, occupied with their own activities. And when that happens, we find that certain traditions, certain cultural practices are not sufficiently passed down from one generation to another. So these are some negative effects of the changing roles of men and women in Caribbean society. Now let's talk about another effect of changing roles, and this one has to do with an identity crisis. Remember we defined the term identity crisis? Yes, it's a crisis in one's sense of self. You may question, who am I? What are my roles? What are my responsibilities? Because the roles are changing. Our sense of self is largely gained from the roles we have within different situations, but especially perhaps within the family. When these traditional roles change, family members may experience an identity crisis. And that is because the roles are now blurred. We don't have work that is considered to be just for men anymore, or work that is just considered for women anymore. So the lines are blurred, the roles are blurred. So that could create an identity crisis. We have seen that a person can have a particular status, such as a mother. This status forms part of her identity. She's a mother and she understands where this puts her in her relationship to other people. Think about it. When somebody asks you, who are you? What do you say? You may usually say, well, I am a child. I am a son, I am a daughter, I am a mother, I am a father. That's what we usually say when people ask us who we are. So when we're no longer taking the responsibilities that are associated with certain roles, it may be very difficult to decide or understand who we are as an individual. Now let's look at an example of an identity crisis. Now, the changes in traditional roles have meant, among other things, that more women are seeking full-time employment. This might conflict with her identity as a mother, especially if she has to place her children in someone else's care while she is at work. Similarly, sharing household decision-making may cause her conflict if she feels uncomfortable challenging traditional roles. So yes, mothers suffer from an identity crisis, especially if they go out and work. They may ask themselves, am I good enough as a mother? That is because there's so many expectations that are placed on working mother. Our society, unfortunately, can mom shame mothers. You know, we may have a mother who is not going to work and she might say, well, look at that neighbor. She's going to work and she didn't even make breakfast for her children. Now, how do you think the working mother would feel? Very inadequate. And she may develop an identity crisis and even suffer from what we call mom guilt. So this is a classic example of an identity crisis whereby women who are mothers may question whether they're doing a good job or not because they cannot attend to their children all the time because they're out in the field of work. So therefore, they suffer from an identity crisis. It may or may not happen. Now, let's not be fooled, students. Not only women who are mothers suffer from identity crises, men could also suffer from identity crises. Think about it. A man might be a father and also think of himself as the breadwinner and as head of the house. These are elements of his identity, and he might feel able to prove himself by setting and achieving goals and by providing for his family. Such ideas will possibly be stronger if he comes from a patriarchal or patriarchal family. He thinks that he's a man just because he is the sole breadwinner, just because he's the head of the house. So now what happens if his wife starts working? What happens if his wife is making enough money and she doesn't depend on his income solely? What do you think will happen? Well, his identity may be threatened and he suffers from an identity crisis because he's questioning whether he can still be the provider or the head of the house. All right? And he may even feel emasculated by his wife, threatened by his wife's successes and achievements and so forth, and develop an identity crisis in the process. He may also not be comfortable with his wife making some of the financial decisions for the home. Even though she is contributing a lot financially, he may not be okay with that, and therefore may develop an identity crisis. What do we say to such a man? Well, my advice is to be proud of your wife. Be proud of the mother of your children. Be grateful that she's contributing financially to the household. Celebrate her. It's nothing to be threatened about. Now we'll turn our attention to another negative effect of changing roles in Caribbean society. And this one is very similar to an identity crisis. However, it has to do with role conflict. Yes, role conflict is usually applied to the situation where the ability to perform one role is hindered by the need to perform another role at the same time. Now let me give you an example of what that exactly means. For example, a father will find his caring for his family role in conflict with his role as breadwinner if he has to move away in order to find work. So he has different roles. Apart from being a breadwinner, he's also there to care for his family, to protect his family. But if he's absent in the household, he's not there physically, then he may experience role conflict, whereby it's very difficult for him to manage all of these roles simultaneously. Now, do you think that children experience role conflicts as a result of the changing roles within the family? You know, I most certainly think they do, and here's why. If more parents are going to work, both parents are working, and children are left unsupervised, it may mean that the older siblings are tasked with looking after the younger siblings. So a sibling or a child may have the role as son or daughter. But in addition to being son or daughter, that child has the added role of eldest sibling or eldest brother or eldest sister, and that means he or she is tasked with taking care of the younger siblings in the family. And as a child may suffer from role conflict because you're 15, you're 16, you want to go hang out with your friends, you want to leave early for school, but you have to take care of your younger siblings. And you definitely will suffer from role conflict. Now, there's nothing wrong with you assisting your parents because chances are they're making sacrifices for you. But if it's a case whereby you are the primary caregiver, you are the one who is doing everything for your siblings, then that is a cause for concern. So guys, now we've looked at role conflicts, we've looked at identity crises, and there's another term we defined earlier on that we're going to discuss, and that has to do with double burden. Yes, the double burden, the dreaded double burden. Sociologists argue that greater involvement in the workplace has resulted in the double burden, especially for women. Women are expected to continue the traditional role within the home while working similar hours to their partners. Could you imagine that situation? Having a woman going out to work, having a 9-to-5 job, coming home in the afternoon, and still expected to complete or to do all the traditional responsibilities that are assigned to a mother or to a wife. That is why we call it double burden. Now, to better illustrate what I mean about the double burden, I'm going to share a scenario with you. A scenario with two characters, Barbara and Troy. So do follow, and I hope that you're paying attention because I have some questions for you after this scenario, or what I call a case study. Barbara works full-time as her husband Troy does. They earn similar salaries. However, the responsibility for the home and children rests almost completely with Barbara. Barbara and Troy leave home together at 6 a.m. every morning and return at 5 p.m. But Barbara's day begins much earlier. She gets up at 4:30 a.m. to prepare breakfast and make sure everything is ready for the day ahead. Upon arriving home in the evening, she cooks serves dinner, and cleans up after the meal. She always tries to do whatever she can to prepare for the following day, but is often too tired to do much. Before going to bed, she checks over the children's homework. If Troy does not feel like doing it or goes out for a drink or to play dominoes with his friends, Troy sees taking care of the yard to be his responsibility. But this is done quite easily in a couple of hours at the weekend. Troy's position is simple. His mother did it, so he does not see why Barbara complains. I do hope that you paid attention to that case study. Are you annoyed at Troy? Are you fuming at him? I certainly hope so. Are you able to identify the concept of double burden represented in the case study? What examples do we have of the double burden in the case study? Is it Troy's responsibilities or Barbara's responsibilities? Yes, it has to do with Barbara's responsibilities, because guess what? Both she and Troy, they work similar hours. They both leave home at the same time. They get home at the same time, yet Barbara has to wake up earlier than Troy because she needs to complete other household tasks and duties. She has to take care of the kids when she gets back in the evening, while all Troy does for the home is clean the yard on the weekends. Now that is a classic case, a classic example of double burden, whereby women who have 9-to-5 jobs, they're out there every day for the entire day. When they get home, they're still expected to do the traditional jobs and tasks that are associated with being a wife or a mother. Now students, do you think this arrangement is fair to Barbara? No, of course not. That is because both Barbara and Troy work similar hours. Both of them should share the responsibilities equally. When that happens, we say it's an egalitarian household or situation. I would go as far as to say that it's a patriarchal situation, because it seems that Troy makes the final decisions for the home. I'm sure Barbara is not okay with such a situation, but because it's a patriarchal household, she may be afraid or refuses to challenge Troy's assumptions as to who a mother is or what makes a good wife. As we continue to look at the other negative effects of changing roles in Caribbean society, I must let you know a little bit about male marginalization. Yes, male marginalization. Now, this is a very controversial theory that was developed in the late 1980s by Jamaican professor Errol Miller. He says that males are being marginalized. What comes to mind when you hear the word marginalized? Now, if a thing is marginalized, then it means it has moved from its central or primary position out to the edges or the fringes. So when we are talking about male marginalization, we are referring to situations where males are much less dominant or central than they once were. In other words, there is evidence of exclusion or discrimination against males solely based on their sex. Just the fact that you're a male, you are discriminated against. That is what male marginalization is all about. Of course, this is a very controversial theory because not all sociologists agree that males are being marginalized. To better understand what male marginalization is, let us pay attention to what Errol Miller had to say, and you decide whether you agree with him or not. He said, men in poor families do not have a central position in the family. He also said a decreasing number of men are employed in the highest paying and most prestigious occupations. He also said men's earning power is decreasing in relation to women's, especially in white-collar occupations. Now, do you think that's true in our society? Do you think that a decreasing number of men are employed in the highest paying and most prestigious occupations? I really don't think so, because if we look at how many men we have as managers and supervisors and policy makers and politicians and government officials, we would see that we have more men serving in those capacities than women, even though we have an increasing number of women in leadership positions. So we would not say that is necessarily true for the Guyanese situation. By paying attention to what Era Miller said, do you think male marginalization exists? Do you think that men are discriminated against or excluded from certain aspects of society? Well, first of all, let us try to understand what discrimination means and what prejudice is, because there's a difference between prejudice and discrimination. For example, prejudice has to do with a preconceived notion or idea about someone or something. It's a generalized belief that you have. For example, if I'm prejudiced, I might say that women are inferior to men. It means that I am sexist. I have that prejudice. I have that opinion of women. Now, discrimination is different from prejudice. Discrimination is an action or a behavior. So if I am a boss, if I'm an employer, and I have two potential workers, one is a male, one is a female. If the female is more qualified than the male, yet I still choose the male for the job, then it means I'm discriminating against the female. That is what discrimination is. It's an action, it's a behavior. Prejudice is more of a mentality. It's more of a belief that you have. And male marginalization, the nature of male marginalization has to do more with discrimination than prejudice. So now that we know what prejudice and discrimination are, do you think male marginalization exists? Are men discriminated against in our society? Now think about it. There are no state laws or policies that deny men access to opportunities. No government-sponsored type of discrimination against men. Even though we may have more females furthering their studies and attending tertiary institutions, it doesn't mean that men are discriminated against. They have opportunities to go to the University of Guyana or to further their studies. They have opportunities to apply to different types of jobs and gain experience in leadership capacities. So we do see that there's no real discrimination of men in our society. But that doesn't mean there isn't prejudice. We may not have discrimination against men, but we certainly have prejudice. Now that we've spoken about discrimination, prejudice, and male marginalization, let's talk about the gender gap in education in Guyana. Yes, there is a gender gap. In 2018, the University of Guyana hosted a symposium on the underperformance of boys in the Guyanese education system. During the symposium, Dr. Newman, representative of the Commonwealth of Learning, noted 3 key statistics which indicate a widening gender gap in Guyanese education. He noted that girls outperform boys in literacy tests once they transition into higher grade levels. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think girls outperform boys in literacy tests and even in other areas while in school? Now, it could be that our education system does not adequately cater to the learning styles of boys. For example, boys tend to be more physically active. It might be very difficult for them to sit in a classroom for 4, 5, 6 hours. So teachers have to now find strategies and ways to enable boys to be more inclined to learning. It really is something that educators like myself have to think about on a very regular basis. So definitely more boys should be encouraged to learn. Sometimes educators don't even pay any attention to the boys in the class because they feel like the boys are just there to waste time. And that is also a very sad reality. The reason this may happen too is because boys are not interested in learning. They may see going to school as being feminine. They may see books as being related to girls' work. They may see using standard English as being feminine. They may even challenge the authority of female teachers because they feel that female teachers do not have the right to speak to them or tell them what to do. And these attitudes and beliefs are very much traditional. And sometimes boys, they even drop out of school. Yes, they leave school earlier than their female counterparts. This could be because their parents do not see education as a viable means of achieving success. They drop out in third form or fourth form and they go and work because guess what? A man's job is to work, to provide for his family. But parents and adults need to also understand that tertiary education is also important. And finishing school is equally important because when you have your CSEC subjects, when you develop yourself professionally, you're able to get a higher paying job. Yes, sometimes children may also leave school because of poverty. But guess what? If you leave school because of poverty and think that you're going to go and make some money, you'll always be at one level. If you further your studies or even if you finish high school, you write your CSEC subjects, you are able to get out of poverty because education is a viable means of getting out of poverty so that you do not contribute to that cycle. All right? And like I said too, boys are less likely to transition to tertiary institution and pursue tertiary programs. And I think we have always been hearing that boys are underachieving, but we need to hear more positive things and we need to encourage our young men to pursue their goals, pursue education because it is quite important. Now students, as we wrap up today's session, I'd like to share a very inspirational video with you. Featured in this video is young Guyanese cricketer Jonathan Rampersad from J.C. Chani Singh Secondary School who did extremely well at his CSEC exams. Of course, it was not a very easy road for him, and with the changing roles in his family, he had to make sacrifices along with his mother. I hope that you find this video inspirational and I hope it motivates you to pursue your dreams as well.
Four months prior to the CXC, I've thought about giving up because my mother wasn't wealthy enough getting me or affording to send me at school, and she faced many challenges, and I could see that I had to quit for a month, and it was the tree of JC senior teacher who had got me back into school and got me up and running, and I am thankful for it.
The 16-year-old wrote 11 subjects at this year's Caribbean Secondary Education Certificate and secured 9 grade 1s and 2 grade 2s. He reflected it was truly hard work over the years that brought him success.
Since I've been 8 years old, I've been going to the farm with my parents, carrying my books. While they do their work, I'll be reading my book in the afternoon. Coming forward now, when I wrote National Grade 6 Common Entrance, I had 499 marks and I was placed at President College, and my mother took transfer from me and bring me to J.C. Johnson Secondary School, which I wanted to go to PHS or Multi, but she couldn't afford to send me there. After, in 2018, when I represented Guyana in Jamaica, when I came home, I had a tragic shock of my father, and that was the point in life that I had to take more responsibility in the home, where I had to take up responsibility that my father performed, and it was my mother who would have been the sole breadwinner for the house. Coming into the CXC, it was a tough challenge for me because I had to balance cricket and academics both equally.
The tragedy he speaks of is his father, a farmer who suffered a stroke which has resulted in his left arm being paralyzed. His mother, who sells confectionery and food outside of his school, had to step up to be the sole breadwinner.
Financially, I worked very hard to support him. And morning time when I wake him up, something say, "Oh, mommy, I want to sleep." I said, "No, you have to make sacrifice because this is once in a lifetime opportunity." And that's the way. Sometimes, of course, I fight, I don't like. But I thank God for it.
Cricket and academics were not the only aspect of his life he had to balance, since he took up the role of farming for the family.
After I come to school in the morning and I go home back, I go to the farm in the afternoon. I spend like an hour some afternoon 2 hours, some afternoon more. I would miss practice, usually when I spend more. I come to practice, go home back around 6, as sir give me extra lesson from 6 to 7, and the rest time in the night I spend completing my SBA.
For Rampersad, he was a West Indies under 15 selectee, and luckily his secondary school neighbors the Rose Tongue Youth and Sports Club, which developed him into the exceptional talent.
So Jonathan is following in a well-defined tradition, and we are very happy for him. We are very, very proud of him. And those of us who know his life know that to succeed, he really had to go through some difficult times. So we as a club are very proud of him. We have 2 other boys who did reasonably well. Lucas Arthur from the club, I think, has 6 grade 1s. And Mahendra Gopilar, who is a teammate of Jonathan and the Guyana junior team, also did well. And
I know that's a big miss for me this year in the under-17 tournament. I could have been climbing another milestone again. And then again, seeing young players like St. Clair and Hetmai and Chemo perform, it gave me a big motivation that I could do well and one day reach to the top and accomplish another goal of mine. I want to play cricket at the highest level and wear the maroon cap one day in life. And then academically, I want to do good and make my parents proud.
Well, I know he is going to be a great man because I am going to be with him, guide him along, push him to become whatever he wants to be in future.
An aspiring agricultural engineer like his grandfather, Brijmohan Ramsaran, young Rampersad is hoping that he can be awarded a scholarship in the near future so that he can be afforded a chance to live his dream. For the newsroom, Akin Green.